It is so good to be back. It is so good to see your faces. And we actually did think about you guys when we were gone. We loved the place that we went to on Molokai. We named our puppy after the place that we went to. Hawaii, we found it when we were in Alaska. When we realized that half of Alaska went to Hawaii for the winter. We wonder where everybody go, and so Pastor Tori did some research, and she found among all the islands there one special island that has a unique history. It's where they used to dump all the lepers and people who had skin diseases that were brought upon as a gift from the European continent to the Hawaiian people. And they would take them in order to isolate them, very similar to COVID, except to the extreme. They would isolate them on a peninsula that was butted up against the highest sea cliffs in the world on the island of Molokai. And it has a spiritual impact because it was a combination of the oppression and the rejection of a people. They were not allowed to see their own families. If they had a baby on the island, these lepers, the baby would immediately be taken from them, from their arms, whisked them away. They were not allowed to love their babies. And so even to this day, children under the age of 16 are not allowed to go out on the peninsula where there's only a few lepers who are left, people who suffer from Hansen's disease, because of the memory of having their children taken from them. But in the midst of this, there was a Catholic priest by the name of Father Damien who went to the island and who said, I wish to give my life to these people. In the process of loving them, in the process of restoring their humanity to that degree. He gave them something because they could not go back to their lives. They could not reconstitute what was blissful and wonderful and happy in their lives, but he gave them a sense that they are beloved children of God, and he embraced them. And he himself became a leper. And he came in front of his people and said, now there is nothing separating me from you. We are all in the disease together, and we are all beautiful. Molokai has that sense of draw. It is not a developed Hawaiian island. You can't go there and just see people sitting around with the fancy drinks with the umbrellas and watching professional hula dancers from Indonesia come in and dance for you. There's none of that. It's a hometown. It's a small town feel in a tropical island. And we love it because it restores our soul. Every morning we go out to the beach and we have our quiet time. And we breathe in the salt air and we remember that our memories are not based on a past that we want to somehow, sorry about this word, regurgitate because they were wonderful days. That our being, our memories are based upon a God who calls us into God's self, into Sabbath, into rest. Do you guys, of course you do, remember the show Happy Days? You probably could sing the theme song. I'm not going to embarrass myself by singing Monday, Tuesday, Happy Days. I'm not going to do it. But our whole high school would be glued to the television set whenever Happy Days comes on. Arthur Fonzarelli called what? The Fonz, with his A and his collars up and all that. He defined for a generation of young men what cool was supposed to be. This is how and we would have so many of the young men in our high school would dress like him, except they would have long hair and not the short, slick back hair. And they would act like him, thinking that that was just the coolest thing in the world. It was called Happy Days. And somehow the 1950s have always been equated with happy days. I was in a Bible study once, And we were talking about the 1950s, and there was a woman by the name of Marianne, and she goes, and she was just caught up into this, the 1950s, the 50s, it was wonderful. Everything was wonderful. And after she glowed for a little bit, we were all looking at her because she was the only one who was having a happy day moment about the 1950s. And somebody in the Bible study said, it wasn't necessarily wonderful for everyone. It really wasn't wonderful for so many people of color. Jim Crow was hot back then, big time. It wasn't wonderful for even women, who I know it's going to be a shock, but women back in the 50s were not paid the equivalent of men for the same job. What? Thank God we're not there anymore, right? So the 50s were not necessarily happy days. They were happy days for some, but for many they were not that, leading to the reaction and the protests of the 1960s. There is a tool that sociologists use when they look at politics and the social sphere. It's called nostalgia politics. Basically it's a tool for analysis, but it's also a tool politicians use all the time. It's as big as the other one in their toolbox, which is fear. If you can get somebody to be afraid of something, a defined enemy, and if you could find some crazy label to attach to something so that everybody begins to use that one word to become afraid of it, then you can control their votes, and you can control and you can maintain power. It's called nostalgia politic, and politicians use it all the time. If we could just define what the glory days of the past were like and get people to remember it, but to remember it fondly, not to remember the darker side of those glory days, but to remember it says, oh, if only we can bring that back. We do it in the church. You know we do it. Oh, and our memory is like, remember the glory days when our pews were full. Remember the glory days when our Sunday school was brimming with children and we had these youth groups and all that was going on in the church. And we remember it so well. And you know what? They were amazing days because culture was supporting the church to that degree. And so sometimes it makes us a little bit nostalgic, a little bit sick in the stomach. It's like, why can't we have those days? What can repeat? And you know, when COVID hit, most of us were saying the same thing. Most pastors were saying the same thing. Among all the horrid things that happen, a blessing. We're seeing with different eyes at this point. We don't want to go back to what we think is normal in the church. This is an opportunity for us to listen deeply to the Spirit and to the times and to our neighbors, and to go into their lives, their sufferings, their disease, and to become a part of them, just like Father Damien did with the lepers, Molokai. Nostalgia politic is what was operating with the disciples on this day when Jesus was taken up into heaven. Before, I'm going to concentrate on right now, before he was taken up, they had a conversation. It was the last recorded words that we have of Jesus. It was the last time we have a record of the disciples talking to Jesus. And Jesus had spent 40 days talking about what really matters. The kingdom of God, the reign of God, God's triumph over evil within the world. 40 days, that's almost like a PhD in Jesus. 40 days. They must see so clearly now what it's all about. And we're ready for Luke to write the Acts of the Apostles and really take off. Now they know everything they need to know. And so what is that one question that they pose to Jesus before he leaves? Jesus, I got one more question. Is this the time that you're going to restore the kingdom of Israel? Do you hear the nostalgia in that? Is this the time we're going to go back to the glory days, the happy days, when we didn't have Rome looming over us, telling us what to do, when we didn't have Egypt, and when we didn't have Assyria, and we didn't have Babylon, but when we were free? Is this the time that you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel? It's mega, make Israel great again. Is this the time that that's going to happen? And I could just imagine, I could hear it, Jesus' eyes just rolling. I just spent 40 days redefining what power was, redefining what it meant not to look away from humanity, not to look away from your neighbor because you're imagining a glorified past. But everything I've done is to look toward your neighbor, toward the person who is carrying the disease, and to go into their life and to love them. And when Jesus was taken up, we know because we're so smart, we know there's no such thing as up. That up is just that which is away from a gravitational center. So in the biblical era, you have the world is flat. Everybody knows the world is flat. So up makes sense. It's one direction, up. And there's well, what about the people on the other side of the world if the world is round? Those are two different directions. So we know that up needs to be seen differently than spatially. We sing this song calling us to look into the eyes of face of Jesus, look full in his glorious face, and what the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. Beautiful hymn, but on this moment, we're going to have to throw that verse out. Because it's not for us to, like the disciples, looking at Jesus ascending to the Father, and the things of earth grow strangely dim. Now I don't have to worry about this down here, because I'm looking at glory. I'm looking at something so amazing. The call of this Ascension Sunday for us is not to look at Jesus, but to look through Jesus' eyes. And that changes everything. We begin to see differently. We begin to be liberated from our political agendas and the lens at which we evaluate everything, that we get upset about everything. We're seeing through the eyes of Jesus. There is a movie we saw recently called Armageddon Times. It did not do well in the theaters. It got high praises everywhere else, all the different festivals. This is an amazing film. It only made about $7 million, which is not much for a film. It stars Anthony Hopkins, Anne Hathaway. I'm going to start with the ending of the film. The ending, once you hear it, you're going to say, yeah, I'm not interested. Has a young boy who is in the 6th grade, and he's got a coat, he's got a tie, and he's walking out of a auditorium. He's leaving something, and he's walking down the street. And the camera follows him as he keeps on walking. And that's what you're left with. That's the ending. Well, what did that boy hear in that auditorium? Well, that's then the whole story. Because this boy, whose name was Paul Graff, was a Jewish young man who went to one school, and the school was somewhat integrated. He became best friends with an African-American child who was being held back a grade. They got into all kinds of mischief. And the African American child was picked on by the teacher quite a bit. Now, Paul's father had survived the Holocaust. And so Paul's father had conversations with Paul from time to time, hearing about how this system was treating his best friend unfairly. And Paul's father said, well, let me tell you my story about how your family was mistreated. And after hearing those stories, the father kept saying, have you stood up for him? Have you not just seen him and go, oh, that's too bad, what's going on with my friend? Have you defended him with all that is within your heart, soul, mind, and body? Because that's, when you live through the Holocaust, you come out with a sense of never again. I will be a voice. I will be a witness. I will be a martyr to come up against that kind of evil in order to love. And so Paul, the boy, was conflicted because he was taken out of this school in order to save himself, in order for his parents to give him a future. They put him in a very elite school, a prep school. And a lot of his new friends, when they saw him with Johnny, who was the African American, they said, you don't talk to him, do you? He's never been in your house, has he? And Paul would say, yeah, he has. And then oh, wait a minute, now that I remember, no, he was never in my house. So he was conflicted with two stories. I am given the opportunity for greatness. My father and my mother are saying, you and your family have been through hell on earth. We need the doors to be open for us. This school will allow you. We changed your last name so that people wouldn't look at you and say, he's a Jew. So you could have opportunities to have doors open. And so one day, he was so fed up with these messages, he got together with his African-American friend, said, let's go steal one of the computers. It was in the 1980s. Computers were so expensive back then. Let's go steal a computer and take it to the pawn shop, get enough money. We'll move to Florida for our dreams to come true. African-American child wanted to become an astronaut at NASA. Paul wanted to become an artist, and he would continue was told that he needed to do something substantial with his life and not art. So they stole the computer. They went to pawn it. Johnny, the African-American child, was picked up by the police. And Paul went immediately and said, this was my idea. But the whole system was arranged so that there was help. We're going to help you, Paul. They talked to their parents. They cut a deal. Paul was let go. And Johnny then took the brunt of the whole thing. He disappeared from their sight of the story, leaving them Paul in an auditorium with all these other prep school kids. And the message that the speaker was giving, you are privileged. Many of you will become senators. Many of you will become congressmen. Some of you will become president of the United States. Some of you will become the leaders of industry, of science. You were meant to lead the world. And this is what this education is going to give you. In the midst of that rattle, Paul stands up and he walks off. And he's hearing his grandfather in his head. Are you going to stand up to the bullies? Are you going to be with them? Are you going to turn a blind eye? Why am I saying this in the midst of Ascension Sunday? We need to see through the eyes of Jesus, not just to look upon Jesus. We need people who respond to the invitation, you will be my witnesses throughout all the world. The word witness in the New Testament is the same root word in Greek as martyr. You are to be my martyrs, everything about you. You are to lay down your life because there is a different world that has to win. The movie is called Armageddon Times. The word Armageddon we usually associate with the end times, with that final battle of good and evil coming together on the valley of Armageddon in Israel, which is a highway between Egypt and Mesopotamia. It's where a lot of battles were fought. But in the Old Testament, the other name for Armageddon is the Valley of Jezreel. Jezreel means, in Hebrew, God sows. It is a valley which represents hope. That in God's economy, that in God's reign and realm and kingdom, all will be fed. That during lean times, nobody will starve. One valley in Israel represents a cataclysm of total destruction upon the earth and salvation. So you have a boy, and he's walking down the streets, having just heard he is called to be great. He is called to lead and to rule. And also, he is called to see and to heal and to give hope. It doesn't answer what's going to be his choice. It is left as the book of Acts begins, of just looking up, and the two angels coming and say, why are you looking up passively? You got a job to do. Go and do it. The word Acts in the title Acts of the Apostles is from the Greek word praxis. It means the practices of those who are witnesses, those who have given their all for the sake of Jesus Christ. It means not just individual things that these disciples long ago in the glory days of the church did. The praxis of those who are being sent is upon us right now to see our neighbor differently through the eyes of Christ. The practices are in you to respond to that kind of sight, not with the passivity, but what can you do? The world's a mess. Not from looking back to some glory days. The ascension is an ascending of our spirits, our will, and our insight as we look through Christ's eyes, because we don't have the wisdom and the know-how to interpret and to see and respond to a world like Father Damien saw when he landed on the shores of Molokai, and he saw hopelessness, and he saw disease. And what he brought to them was humanity. And what they brought to him was his humanity. That's how it works on this Sunday called Ascension.